Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of us have a pretty personal relationship with, and that is alcohol.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to, move beyond just sort of the, general like health warnings or like, you've heard this before, and really try to take a deep dive into like the science of what this stuff does to our bodies.
For sure.
We all know there are, health risks associated with drinking, but what if it's even worse than we think?
Yeah. And that's what we're going to be getting into today.
So, to get started, I think one of the things that's really kind of grabbed my attention recently is the World Health Organization came out and they said no amount of alcohol is safe.
Right.
And that's kind of a big deal because, I've heard for years about, like a glass of wine a day is good for you and all this stuff. And now they're saying like one drop is bad for you.
Yeah. So that's a pretty big statement from the WHO. And it really does fly in the face of what a lot of people have believed for a long time about the potential benefits of moderate drinking.
So was all that just bad science then?
Well, there was that Lancet study that came out in 2018, and it kind of debunked those claims about the benefits of moderate drinking. And it really highlighted some serious flaws in the way that earlier research was conducted. And what's really interesting is how this new understanding kind of aligns with the classification of alcohol as a group 1 carcinogen by the WHO.
Group 1.
Yeah.
So that means it's like up there with like asbestos and radiation and tobacco in terms of like how bad it is.
It's in the same category, yeah.
Wow. I don't think most people would put a glass of wine in the same category as asbestos.
Right. Kind of a jarring thought.
So what exactly makes alcohol so dangerous? Like what's actually going on in our bodies when we drink it?
Well, it really comes down to a metabolite called acetaldehyde.
Okay.
And that's produced when your body breaks down alcohol. And this acetaldehyde is really the bad guy. It's highly toxic, and it's actually what causes a lot of the damage.
So it's not even the alcohol itself. It's like what our body turns it into.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's wild. Yeah. So think of it like this. You drink alcohol, your body breaks it down. This acetaldehyde is released, and it basically goes around damaging your DNA.
And that's what leads to cancer.
Exactly. It significantly increases your risk for several different types of cancer.
And how many types of cancer are we talking about here?
Well, alcohol has been linked to at least 7 different types of cancer.
Okay.
And those include oral cancer, throat cancer, esophageal cancer, liver cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, and rectal cancer.
Wow. So basically everywhere that the alcohol goes through your body, it can potentially cause cancer?
Pretty much, yeah. It's like it leaves a trail of destruction in its wake.
That's disturbing.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture.
So we've got this acetaldehyde wreaking havoc in our bodies, but it sounds like the damage goes beyond just DNA.
You're right. It's not just about the DNA damage. Acetaldehyde also triggers widespread inflammation throughout your body.
Inflammation, huh?
Yeah, and that's a big deal because inflammation is one of the key drivers of the aging process.
So it's like we're speeding up our own aging every time we drink.
Essentially, yes.
Wow. So it's not just about the long-term risks of cancer, it's also about how alcohol impacts our bodies on a daily basis.
Right. It's about the cumulative effect of all these little insults that alcohol inflicts upon our systems.
So every time we drink, we're basically making it harder for our bodies to repair themselves.
Exactly. And that can lead to all sorts of health problems down the road.
It's like we're slowly poisoning ourselves from the inside out with each drink.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
It really is. And speaking of sobering, one thing that I've always found kind of weird is how you get so thirsty after drinking.
Yeah.
Like you would think that if you're consuming liquid, you would be more hydrated. Yeah, so what's going on there? Why does alcohol dehydrate us?
Well, it has to do with a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH for short.
Okay.
And this hormone is responsible for helping your kidneys conserve water, but alcohol actually suppresses the production of ADH.
So it's like it's messing with our body's natural ability to stay hydrated?
Exactly. It's like forcing your body into a state of constant dehydration.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that can have some pretty serious consequences.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know from like, summer heat exhaustion and stuff like that, dehydration is no joke.
Absolutely. It can be life-threatening in severe cases.
So we're not just talking about a mild inconvenience here.
No, not at all. Dehydration thickens the blood, which increases the risk of blood clots, heart attacks, and strokes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why cardiovascular disease and cancer, both of which are linked to alcohol, are leading causes of death worldwide.
I was actually just looking at some statistics on the World Data website, and it's pretty startling to see how those two conditions are right up there at the top.
It's a stark reminder that even the seemingly minor effects of alcohol can have major long-term implications.
Yeah, and it's not just about the potentially life-threatening stuff either. There's also the impact on our everyday well-being, like weight gain.
Right. People often forget that alcohol is actually quite calorie dense.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's more calorie dense than carbohydrates, for example.
Really?
Yeah, like just one beer can have the same number of calories as half a bowl of rice.
Wow, I never thought about it like that.
And that's before you even factor in any added sugars that might be in your drinks.
Right, because a lot of alcoholic beverages are loaded with sugar.
Exactly. And on top of the calories themselves, alcohol also tends to stimulate our appetite, so we end up eating more overall.
It's like a double whammy for anyone trying to maintain a healthy weight.
Precisely. It throws off your body's natural hunger cues and makes it harder to regulate your food intake.
So it's not just about the calories in the alcohol itself, it's also about how it impacts our eating habits overall.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted issue.
Now I'm curious about those people who seem to be able to hold their liquor better than others. Like, are they somehow immune to these negative effects, or is that just an illusion?
Well, it's not quite that simple. Some people do have a genetic predisposition that allows them to metabolize acetaldehyde faster.
So their bodies are just better at breaking down that toxic byproduct.
Right, and that can make them appear more tolerant to the effects of alcohol.
So they might not feel as drunk, but their bodies are still dealing with the same toxic stuff.
Exactly. And it's really important to emphasize that training your tolerance is incredibly dangerous.
So, like, trying to drink more and more to build up your tolerance is a bad idea.
Very bad idea.
Because,
Because even if you can drink more without feeling the immediate effects, you're still exposing yourself to the same long-term risks and potentially even more.
so it's kind of like thinking you're invincible just because you don't feel pain as intensely as others.
That's a great analogy. You might not be registering the damage as strongly, but it's still happening.
Right. The damage is still accumulating even if you don't feel it as much in the moment.
Precisely. And over time, that can lead to some very serious health problems, regardless of how well you think you handle alcohol in the moment.
That brings us back to that initial comparison to hard drugs. You know, the insidious nature of alcohol addiction is something that I think we really need to address head on
Absolutely.
because unlike with other drugs, the progression into dependence can be very subtle.
Right. And that's one of the most challenging things about alcohol addiction. It's so integrated into our social lives that it's easy to overlook the warning signs.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, having a glass of wine with dinner or a beer at a barbecue, it's all so normalized.
Exactly. And that makes it even harder to recognize when those habits have crossed the line into dependence.
So how can we tell if our relationship with alcohol has gone too far? Like, what are some red flags to watch out for?
Well, there are a few key questions you can ask yourself.
Okay, I'm listening.
Do you find yourself craving alcohol throughout the day, even in the morning or afternoon? Do you reach for a drink whenever you're feeling bored or stressed?
Okay.
Does your life feel incomplete without alcohol?
Wow, those are some pretty heavy questions.
They are, but they're important questions to ask yourself.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of brush off those feelings, but I guess when you frame it like that, it really makes you stop and think.
Exactly. It's about being honest with yourself, about your relationship with alcohol, and recognizing any patterns that might indicate a problem.
And I think it's important to remember that addiction isn't a sign of weakness.
Absolutely not.
It's a complex condition that affects many people, and there's no shame in seeking help.
I couldn't agree more. There are resources available, and there are people who understand what you're going through.
This whole conversation has really been eye-opening for me.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like I'm seeing alcohol in a completely different light now.
that's what we're here for. To help you understand the science behind alcohol's effects and empower you to make more informed choices about your health and well-being.
So we've talked a lot about the negative side of things. But before we go any further, I think it's important to acknowledge that alcohol is a deeply ingrained part of our culture, and many people enjoy it responsibly.
Of course, the goal here isn't to demonize alcohol or shame anyone for their choices.
Right. It's about having a balanced conversation, understanding both the risks and the realities of alcohol consumption.
Exactly.
And with that in mind, I think it's time to delve a bit deeper into the science of addiction and explore some of the ways that alcohol affects our brains.
I'm ready when you are.
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
So we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back to continue this deep dive into the true impact of alcohol.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back. And, we were talking about, how alcohol kind of hijacks our brains and, leads to this sort of like addictive cycle.
Right.
So can we kind of unpack that a little bit more? Like what's actually happening at the neurochemical level.
No. So it all comes down to dopamine.
Dopamine.
Yeah, that's our brain's reward chemical.
Yep.
So basically, when we do something pleasurable, our brain releases dopamine, and that makes us feel good, and it reinforces that behavior.
Right.
The problem with alcohol is that it kind of provides a shortcut to that dopamine rush.
So it's like getting the reward without having to do the work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine, that feeling of accomplishment you get after finishing a challenging project or achieving a long-sought goal.
Yeah.
That's your brain rewarding you with dopamine for your effort.
Okay.
Alcohol essentially bypasses that whole process.
So it just floods your brain with dopamine without you actually having to earn it.
Pretty much, yeah.
That makes it pretty tempting, especially when you're feeling stressed or down.
Right, it's like choosing instant gratification over long-term satisfaction.
And the more you rely on that shortcut, the more your brain starts to crave it.
Exactly. And that leads to a really dangerous cycle of dependence where you need more and more alcohol to achieve that same dopamine rush.
So it's like developing a tolerance, but for your brain's reward system.
Precisely the more you drink, the less sensitive your brain becomes to those dopamine rewards.
So you need to drink more to feel the same effects.
Right, and this is what makes alcohol addiction so insidious. It's a gradual process, and it can be hard to recognize when those drinking habits have crossed the line into dependence.
Yeah, it's like a slippery slope.
Exactly.
Speaking of slippery slopes, I was reading this really interesting article about the Yagan people.
Oh, yeah?
They're an indigenous tribe from South America, and they have this really tragic story about how alcohol almost completely wiped out their culture.
It's a really sad example of how the introduction of alcohol can just decimate a community.
Yeah, they had thrived for thousands of years in this incredibly harsh environment, but then when they were exposed to alcohol, it just ravaged their population.
It's a stark reminder of the power of addiction and the devastating consequences it can have.
Yeah, the last surviving member of the tribe, this elderly woman, she attributed their near extinction to alcohol.
It's heartbreaking to think about how something that's so normalized in our society can have such a profound impact on a culture.
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective.
For sure.
For centuries, moderate drinking was often considered acceptable, even healthy in some cases.
Right. There was that whole thing about a glass of red wine a day being good for your heart.
Yeah, exactly. But now the scientific evidence is painting a much different picture.
It's a constant evolution of understanding, and it's important that we stay informed and adapt our choices accordingly.
So I guess the big question is, are there people who can actually handle their alcohol without any negative consequences?
Well, as we discussed earlier, some individuals might have a genetic predisposition that allows them to metabolize alcohol more efficiently.
Right.
But even those individuals are still exposed to the long-term risks.
So it's not like a free pass.
Definitely not.
It's like having a higher pain tolerance.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
You might not feel it as intensely, but the injury is still there.
Exactly. And over time, those injuries can accumulate and lead to serious health problems.
So regardless of your genetics, moderation is still key.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's kind of sum up what we've learned so far. What's the most important thing for people to understand about alcohol?
I think the key takeaway is that alcohol is a powerful and potentially addictive substance.
Okay.
It's not just a harmless beverage. It has far-reaching consequences that we need to be aware of.
And those consequences go beyond just the immediate effects of getting drunk.
Right. We're talking about long-term health risks, damage to our organs, and even changes to our brain chemistry.
So no amount of alcohol is truly safe.
That's the conclusion that the scientific evidence is increasingly pointing towards.
Wow, that's a pretty big statement.
It is, and it challenges a lot of the long-held beliefs and social norms that we have around alcohol consumption.
So how do we navigate a world where alcohol is so deeply embedded in our culture, yet we're now aware of its true nature?
It's a tough question, but I think it starts with individual awareness. We need to be honest with ourselves about our drinking habits and the impact that alcohol is having on our lives.
And then we need to make conscious choices based on that awareness.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual choices either. We need to start having more open and honest conversations about alcohol with our friends, families, and communities.
So it's about changing the culture around alcohol.
Right. We need to move away from the glamorization of alcohol and towards a more balanced and informed perspective.
And that includes supporting those who are struggling with alcohol dependence.
Absolutely. There's no shame in seeking help, and we need to create an environment where people feel comfortable reaching out for support.
I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of moderation.
Yeah. It's a tough one.
Like, is there such a thing as safe drinking, or is any amount inherently risky?
That's a question that scientists are still debating. But as we've discussed, the evidence is increasingly suggesting that even small amounts of alcohol can have negative effects on our bodies, particularly over time.
So it's really about weighing the risks and benefits and understanding that there's no truly risk-free level of alcohol consumption.
Exactly.
This all makes me wonder if alcohol were a newly discovered substance today, with all the knowledge we now have, would it even be legal?
That's a really interesting question.
Right. Like, imagine if we were evaluating alcohol through the same lens as we do other drugs.
Would it pass the safety and efficacy tests?
Would it be readily available on supermarket shelves?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely makes you think.
It highlights how our historical and cultural biases have shaped our relationship with alcohol,
For sure.
and maybe it's time to reevaluate that relationship,
I think so.
to move beyond those ingrained habits and social norms and start making decisions based on scientific evidence and a genuine concern for our well-being.
That's the key to creating a healthier and happier future for ourselves and for generations to come.
I completely agree.
So for those listening who might be feeling a little overwhelmed or unsure of where to start, I think the first step is just to take a moment for honest self-reflection.
Okay, so like, what does that involve?
Well, just take some time to really think about your drinking habits, your motivations for drinking, and the impact that alcohol is having on your life.
So it's about becoming aware of the patterns and triggers that might be leading to unhealthy behaviors.
Exactly. And once you have a better understanding of your own relationship with alcohol, you can start to explore some healthier coping mechanisms and alternatives.
So instead of reaching for a drink when you're stressed or bored, find something else that brings you joy and relaxation.
Right. There are countless ways to enjoy life and connect with others without alcohol being the central focus.
It's about rediscovering those simple pleasures and finding fulfillment in the things that truly matter.
And remember, support is available.
Yes, absolutely.
There are countless resources, communities, and professionals who can guide you on your journey to a healthier, happier you.
So don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help.
It's a sign of strength, not weakness.
And taking that first step towards change is often the hardest, but it's also the most rewarding.
I couldn't agree more.
So if you're feeling lost or alone, remember that there's a whole world of support out there waiting to embrace you.
And change is possible, one step at a time. You can break free from the grip of alcohol and create a life filled with purpose, joy, and well-being.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the science of alcohol's impact on our bodies to the social and cultural factors that shape our relationship with it.
It's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope it's provided our listeners with some valuable insights to help them make more informed choices about their health and well-being.
Yeah, it really has been a lot to take in.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like I'm looking at alcohol in a whole new light now, and, I imagine a lot of our listeners are probably feeling the same way.
It's definitely one of those topics that once you start peeling back the layers, you
Yeah.
can really change your perspective.
So where do we go from here? Like, how do we navigate a world where alcohol is so ingrained in our culture, but we now know all these things about its true impact?
I think it starts with just becoming more aware and making more conscious choices about our own relationship with alcohol.
Okay.
But it also goes beyond that. We need to start having more open and honest conversations about this with the people around us.
With our friends and family.
Exactly. Like, it's okay to question the role that alcohol plays in our lives and to challenge those social norms that make it seem like drinking is always necessary or even expected.
I think, for a lot of people, it's hard to imagine socializing without alcohol.
Yeah, I get that it's so deeply embedded in our culture, but I think it's important to remember that there are other ways to connect with people and have fun.
And, we don't have to completely abstain from alcohol to make a difference.
Right. Even just reducing our consumption or being more mindful of our drinking habits can have a positive impact on our health.
It's all about taking small steps and finding what works best for each individual.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to this.
As we wrap up today, I want to leave our listeners with a sense of hope.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot about the risks associated with alcohol, but we've also seen the incredible power of knowledge to guide us towards healthier choices.
Absolutely. And remember, change is possible.
It's never too late to take control of your health and well-being.
And you don't have to do it alone. There are so many resources available to support you on this journey, whether it's therapy support groups, online communities, or even just talking to a trusted friend or family member.
It's really inspiring to see how many people are choosing to prioritize their health and make positive changes in their lives.
It's a reminder that we all have the power to create a brighter future for ourselves.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the true impact of alcohol.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit life-changing. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.
Cheers to that.